So the President of the United States making an announcement, he's going to build 25 ships, 30,000 tons, going to be equipped with hypersonics, and it's not going to take 10 years. China comes in, it's the reason for concern. They have between 300 and 405 ships. We cop out between 275 and 296. I believe we have 68 submarines. China's got 73. I don't know how they surpassed us, but we're going to have 12 to 15 more. The question is, Joey, how soon can you get it done? Because we had to revitalize our shipyards. That's why we brought in the Japanese deal.
So the acquisition process, which Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, talked about this, is very convoluted. It's one of the main pork spending problems. There's preferential points where you can develop a lesser product at a higher price but still get picked up. There's a lot of problems there that they need to work on at the Pentagon. But he said, I mean, President Trump, he inferred that less than 10 years. He said, we don't want to take 10 years or 15 years, we want it quicker. And we're working on ships that aren't really ships, that are underwater drone boats that do a lot of things, carry people, carry bombs and bullets, can be offensive as well as defensive. And as much as we've talked about drones in the air, it's the drones in the water that are the next big thing. And when he says other Navy assets, I think that's what he's talking about.
All right, if we can, Kellyanne, let's switch over to the other big perilous hotspot in the world, and that is in Venezuela, where we've taken a third tanker in the last 7 days. The second one was taken yesterday. A third one's taken today. U.S. Coast Guard doing the damage. They're trying to squeeze Venezuela. What are the stakes right now?
The stakes are high, but this is American might at work. Why? You talk about all these deaths from drugs. You can say 2 Vietnam wars a year. You can say 30 times annually the number of people who perished here in the World Trade Centers on 9/11. The statistics go on and on. But here's the main point. These drug cartels have killed more Americans than Hamas has killed, a foreign terrorist organization. You can name all the terrorist organizations. So the president wants everybody to look at them that way. And also he's got these Democrats boneheadedly now sort of supporting Maduro and the drug cartels. Why? They're on the side of the narco-terrorists by saying, hold on, it's just Trump's taking out marijuana, cocaine. That's not what's really bothering these kids. And this guy is illegitimately elected, Maduro. The same Democrats who said Trump is illegitimately elected every time he gets elected, but they can't say this about Maduro. I think Trump's going to continue for a couple of reasons. One is the drugs, that if you cut this off where it is, then we literally save millions of lives. Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, said something very important recently. She said, President doesn't look at this by the number of people killed. He looks at it as the number of lives saved. This is an important distinction for the commander-in-chief and the president. The second reason is the oil. Remember when President Trump said to Jeb Bush and others, well, the problem with Iran and Afghanistan is you guys didn't take the oil. He wants the oil. And he looks at these oil fields as having been stolen by Venezuela, kicked out the U.S. companies like Chevron, Shell, and the rest of them. And he's saying you're taking the profits from the ill-begotten oil and you're trafficking human beings and you're kidnapping and you're flooding drugs and you're murdering people. So this has to stop. I just have to ask the Democrats with a straight face. I'm worried that Colombia may go in there and help Venezuela. I shouldn't be worried that a Democratic congressman is in there defending and helping Venezuela.
80% of the oil that Venezuela ships out, Jillian, goes to China.
Goes to China,
Yep.
exactly.
So this matters a lot. China loves their discounted oil from renegade countries and loves them coming in ghost tankers.
And one of the key questions is how much pressure is the administration, the Trump administration, putting on Chinese leaders to find other avenues, other resources for this stuff. To Kellyanne's point, as I understand it, the president feels that in the 70s and 80s, when Venezuela sort of like nationalized their entire oil industry,
Hugo Chavez.
they commandeered, U.S. Oil infrastructure that was there. What I don't understand is the president keeps saying last week and this week that America wants it back. But we're also not pursuing regime change. There is no way to, quote unquote, get that back with Maduro in power. The other thing I would like to ask the president is why we don't just take Maduro out and then we don't have to fight this whole war. And then we don't have to worry about...
You mean just kill him, capture him, bring him back?
Or have him taken elsewhere. I was saying in the commercial break that Belarus's government has made an offer to give him safe haven if he wants to flee. He certainly has plenty of enemies inside his own country. I wonder how much pressure is being borne on him right now internally and how much longer he's actually going to last. I have not been to Belarus.
So we're not old enough, Jillian, to remember the Truman Doctrine and NSC 68, which was this idea that we go into pretty much every country in South America, and whether it's a liberal, progressive, or socialist, Marxist, go in and make sure every government in South America is not welcoming in the Soviets during the Cold War. I mean, it worked out great in places like Brazil or Chile. It didn't work out so great in Haiti, Cuba, a bunch of other places. And so this is kind of a re-upping of that, but it's done overtly, not covertly, number one. And number two, really this isn't about drugs. And I appreciate the president. I appreciate the work on drugs. Drugs, fentanyl, it comes from China to Mexico and across land into our country. What it's about is showing China, Venezuela supplies them with about 7% of their oil and gas, which is enough to make a dent. It's about letting the world and China know you're not going to come into our backyard and do what you did in Africa or tried to do in the Middle East, because guess who's in Afghanistan? It's China. China's in Afghanistan. And so you're not going to do what you did in those places here. We own the Western Hemisphere. We own the Americas. Do I care if life gets better for people in Venezuela? I would like for it to, but it's not my main motivation. I don't think it's President Trump's main motivation. If you can bring Maduro to the table to get Citgo legally back in the hands of Americans, which is what the courts are trying to do, to get access back for ExxonMobil for oil and gas. Well, I mean, if it's do that or die, if it's do that or exile, then maybe they do. And I think that's part of the plan.
Secretary Rubio gave this like 2-hour-long press briefing on Friday, and he said that option is off the table.
But my point is, if you just take him out, now you've got chaos again. And we've seen in South America that can go either way.
Well, where do you stand on this, Jess?
Well, I think there just needs to be more clarity as to what's actually going on here. You're getting conflicting messages. Some days it's a war. Some days we're going for a regime change. Some days we're just, taking out drug smugglers who are bringing cocaine and usually going in the wrong direction. Like that double tap strike, that boat was headed to Suriname, was not coming to the U.S. So we need clarity on that. And you have Rand Paul out there asking for that, and Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham is excited about this, which indicates to me that regime change and war is coming, because that's what really gets Lindsey Graham all hot and bothered.
He's for national security.
Yeah, but I also want to point out, in defense of Democrats, we are not saying we love drug smugglers or we're on the side of Maduro. Here you have no. Well, then go and listen to Roger Wicker or Mike Turner or Rand Paul, who are Republicans themselves. Mike Turner's gone so far as to say, are we just killing random people here? I mean, Admiral Bradley testified behind closed doors. We'll see if we get the rest of the video being publicly released. We need to hear from Admiral Halsey as to what happened, what kind of orders are being sent out, because if there are people who are clinging to pieces of wood in the middle of the sea and don't have drugs on them and don't have phones that they're calling their friends to come and get them, we are violating U.S. code and international code as to how we're treating these people. They need to tell us the truth. And Trump always says this is so popular. 53% oppose U.S. attacks on alleged drug smuggling boats, and 63% oppose military action in Venezuela. This is not just for fun and games. This is really serious.
Nobody thinks it's not serious. And I think that for the first time in 25 years, we're addressing a huge problem in our hemisphere. And I think that's extremely popular with the American people.
You need congressional approval if you want to go
We're not going to a war, just like we didn't get congressional approval to remove Noriega.
Well, it's a question then of how long you can skirt technically being involved in an armed conflict.
If you're taking
every president has flirted with this. Every president has used I forgot the name of the legislation, the War Powers Act, whatever it is. Every president, every predecessor to President Trump has used it in their own way. They flirted with it. They violated it here and re-upped it there. That's not a good place for Congress to go. They need to do their job for sure, but that doesn't get anything done.
Hopefully this is done before Christmas and we get the rightfully elected government in there to run their country. They seem to have a plan ready to go with their first 100 days.
Good luck.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.